most fearful moment is when you look behind you and look at your own picture. You're like, oh. All right. Anyway, throughout the presentations today, you've heard this word, venture capital use a lot, right? The fuel for the growth of the product that you want to build. But I bet you have a bunch of questions about, how do you interact with venture capitalists? What are they looking for? Well, we've assembled quite a panel today, hopefully to answer some of those questions. And later on, maybe you'll have the opportunity to reach out to these folks directly and ask some more questions. But without further ado, I just want to introduce each of the panelists, and we're going to dive into a bunch of questions. So I'm just going to run down the order here. Number one, Manu Kumar. He's the founder and chief firestarter, by the way, right. Very cool title. Thank you. Of Kleiner Ventures. You'll have to tell us what fires you'd like to start and which ones you don't. Next is Renata Quintini.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm working on that. Partner at Felicis-Ventures. Next, Trae Vassallo, who's a general partner at Kleiner Perkins Caufield Byers. I always just say KP. I don't know why. So, and then farther down, Ryan Kottenstett.
Yeah, thanks.
I think I need to get the E a little higher here.
That's 99th percentile.
99. Who's a principal at Khosla Ventures. And then last but not least, Rob Coneybeer, who is a managing director at Shasta Ventures. So this panel, I am super excited to have this group together. You are looking at 5 venture capitalists and 5 firms that are very interested in investing in hardware. And I think the story of why and what they're looking for and how to talk to them is an important lesson, and hopefully we can tease some of that over the session. So let's start with question number 1. I'm going to open up questions. We'll just sort of maybe go left to right a little bit, but feel free to chime in. Number 1, when you look at a hardware startup, how do you vet their technical capability and their ability to actually manufacture the product that you're thinking about investing in? We hear a lot about, well, hey, it's proving to be a little harder than I expected. How do you guys look at that and make the assessment?
So for me, most of the companies that I'm talking to are very, very early stage. Typically, I'm talking to companies when it's like 2 founders, and in my case, if it's 2 founders and a dog, that's a positive thing. At that stage, there is very little to actually go on assessing that they will actually be able to build something that's manufacturable. A lot of what I look at is prototypes, and looking at what are the prototypes actually capable of doing. My first hardware company that I ever invested in was Litro, which is the company that's building the new camera that lets you change the focus after you've taken the image. And for Litro at the time, when I made my first investment, the only thing we had was a prototype in a full form factor camera, and we had no idea whether we could actually even take this and put it into a form factor of a consumer camera at that point. Right? So there's a high amount of technical risk, there's a high amount of manufacturing risk, but ultimately it comes down to is it an interesting enough idea? Does it actually change the way that we're doing things? And one of the criteria that I use when I'm looking at companies that are doing hardware is I want companies where the hardware is enabling software. Right? And that's a key description of how I think about investing in companies, that if it's just a straight up hardware thing, that it may not be as interesting. But if it's a hardware that enables a platform and enables software on top of it, that's what becomes more interesting. So that's kind of one of the criteria that I look at. So.
No, I'd like to echo what Manu said about just the software application and hardware being the capture point or sort of the entry point to the market. That's how we at Felicis also approach hardware. And I think our first foray into hardware was our investment in Fitbit. At that point, there was already a product out there, and we came more from a software DNA. We're actually pretty scared of hardware, but we're glad that we did Fitbit, and that sort of changed our viewpoint. And we understood that if it weren't for that capture mechanism, the software insight or the ability to track a different type of data wouldn't be there. And that really fueled our interest, and it just made us more comfortable making more investments in hardware. I think someone that has done it before, even if at a different area, some sort of experience always helps. A working prototype helps, or really a sort of an understanding of a very interesting and big enough problem that the demand is so aching that we as consumers, we ourselves at Felicis put on the hat, is that critical enough for me? Does that move me? Would I love to have this, and can't I live without it once I have it? And if the answer is yes, 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 that makes us really excited to sort of take the leap and get involved with a company and a founder, hardware and all.
So Eric, to the question of like, how do we think about the technical capabilities and like, is the team good at building hardware? Mm-hmm. There's two layers that we think about. One is in the first meeting, since we look at a lot of hardware and I spend a lot of time talking to people in the ecosystem, it's pretty easy to figure out early on whether somebody understands the space at a high level, because first off, they know how hard it is. And they know that to get to a level of polish to actually do something is very difficult. And then the second thing that we do, and this is really, which is more of kind of the mechanics of like what we do, is we always think about what introduction could we make of the people that understand the space at a high level. They can both help them and help us better understand whether they're good at what they do. So what we'll typically do is if we're pretty interested in a space, we'll connect them with the VP of engineering or chief technologist at one of the companies we backed in this space. So for example, we'll connect people with Matt Rogers at Nest all the time. We'll connect them with iFi. We'll connect them with people we know at Ouya. That's the type of thing we do. And then pretty quickly, we figure out like what's that technical capability. And ideally, the company that comes through and does that, they find value in that as well. And they get more of an inside view of like how hard it is to build hardware, not how easy it is to build hardware, which is what you hear in the press all the time.
Yeah, and the one thing I wanted to add, and people who've done hardware understand this, is that it's really easy to get a working prototype in the grand scheme of things. So when a company comes in and presents this awesome working prototype, yes, it really helps because venture capitalists are notoriously bad at trying to see the vision, so having prototypes are a good thing for that. But 99% of the work is taking that prototype, productizing it, and bringing it to market. And that's where all the incredible difficulty that if you haven't done hardware before, you don't know. And so pretty quickly, when you look at the schedules and the plans and the budgets, you really get a sense for, has this person done it before? Hardware, unlike software, you can really quickly kill your company, bankrupt it. You push too fast, you grow too fast, the product's not vetted enough. So it is really important not only to have people on your team who've done hardware before, but to have investors who understand and are going to give you the right guidance as you grow your company.
Yeah. And you can even see it, on projections or stuff like that. That people say, yeah, I'll go from prototype to, launch in 6 months, and I'll need, $1 million. There's no way. And then they're projecting, I'm going to get to a certain scale, I'm going to get all these discounts, and it's a lot harder than that.
There's a joke I make, which is basically that you can't spell hardware without the hard part.
Yeah.
And likewise, you can't spell a geek without the double E part.
I guess the only thing I would add, I echo a lot of what's been said here. The software packages hardware. That's certainly a theme that we think about. Another way of thinking about that is let somebody else do the hard parts of the hardware. If you can leverage commercial off-the-shelf components, do that. There's a lot more opportunity for this now. We have Arduinos out there, and aggressively we've got FPGAs we've had for a while, increasing functionality in that space. So let folks build the things that need high reliability and uptime. Let somebody else do that for you and leverage that intelligently. Echo, yes, hardware's hard, you need experience, but there are different levels of hard, so that's another thing that we think about. What is the design life of the product? If that's something that's critical, and what are the failure modes that matter? If something is a consumer electronics cycle and you can throw it away in a year or two, and the cost of failure is relatively low for that component, then that's one kind of hard. If it's life critical, that's a different kind of hard.
So I get to, as the moderator, I get to ask questions that are self-serving as much as anything else. And you know, from our perspective as a hardware accelerator, these next two questions I think are as interesting to the audience as they are to us. The first question I'm going to ask is, you know, what areas in hardware have overheated? From the perspective, maybe there are too many startups chasing it, and maybe if they come to you, that they've really got to have a strong differentiation in the market to be able to convince you to make an investment. Can I start? Ryan, you want to take first shot?
Yeah, sure. There's been a whole lot of stuff related to quantified self. We've got a whole handful of those investments. I think the question that we're often asking ourselves is, okay, if you're going to be measuring the same suite of metrics that 5 other companies can do, what's unique about your platform? How are you going to be able to build either an ecosystem or a platform around that where you have users, and what's going to be unique about it? So that's certainly one where we've seen a lot. I think everybody's probably seen a lot. We've invested in quite a few, and I think entering early is not sufficient anymore.
Rob?
You stole the first one I was going to say. The other one is, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for 3D printing right now, and at the same time, it's exciting in terms of being able to rapidly prototype things, but it's nowhere near mass consumer adoption. And I think that we're probably 3, 4, 5 years away from having a 3D printer that would be to do the sorts of things that we'd find very interesting. So I think if you look for a historical analogy, I feel like it's somewhat like the hard drive business probably was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Huge number of entrants. It's, you know, Make Magazine even had a 3D printer special, and I could not believe how many different brands and makes of printer there were. So I think that there are some interesting companies doing interesting things there. I think like Form Labs, I would imagine most people in this room are interested in. They have a differentiated approach. People that are taking kind of unique cuts at it. But to take some of the standard off-the-shelf stuff and go in there, I think there's a lot of activity there. But I don't think there's anybody that's really been able to break away from the pack there.
So if I had to pick a third, I would actually pick telepresence. There's a large number of companies that are going after the telepresence space. There's some interesting products there, but there's a lot of companies that are going after telepresence at this point as well.
So I just quickly have to say, so you asked which areas are overheated, and my response is, I think if I look at the number of companies that I think are absolutely knocking the ball out of the park right now, it's small. And so while I think there's a lot of activity, we are at such an early stage right now. Quantified self, yes, is exploding, but that fantastic product that really helps us live a better, healthier, smarter life doesn't exist yet. And so I really see this as, yeah, there's a lot of activity, and that's great. But at some point, I want to take steps, you know, and all the other data you can get at my wrist and really turn it into, Trae, here's how you can live better.
Insights.
And we're a ways off yet. So, I mean, I can't wait to see more companies in quantified self, you know, all these areas. So.
And just anecdotally, a bunch of things that we're seeing pop on deal flow is, I mean, people are still trying to reinvent the light bulb, different ways and different technologies around that. Sort of control temperature in the micro space, in the co-working space, so using your mobile device, so different sensing around, you know, temperature and interacting there. Seen quite a few of those as well. Yeah, on the quantified self thing, it's just more on the data gathering side, but very little on the insight and the sort of the what's next component of it. Yeah, so those are things we're on top of.
Well, my QS device says my heart rate is at 75. Now I need to know what that means. So hopefully there's a startup that's going to tell me what that is. In all seriousness, it's 79 now. Uh-oh.
You're awfully calm.
80. Yeah, uh-oh. All right. Let me take this question before my heart rate explodes here. Let me take the question and actually flip it over. What areas would excite you if you saw more hardware companies or more companies incorporating hardware surge into the market? What markets are underrepresented in your mind? I'm going to look right to you.
I actually don't have an answer to that. Because if I knew that, then I would basically be a crystal ball, and I'm not a crystal ball.
I'll go ahead and take it on. I think the one that's interesting, and it's a lot more fun to talk about, is just the whole world of robotics, I think, is on the cusp of emerging in a really interesting way, because we talk about the Internet of Things, and it's this idea of wireless sensor networks where you actually gather data, and then you can compute and go to the network. But if you don't actuate, take action on the real world, it's not that interesting. And when I think about robotics, I think about it pretty expansively, which is anything that can both sense, think, and act. In the real world, I think of it as robotics. So if you think about the Nest thermostat, for example, I think of that as a robotic device. It builds in machine learning, it learns from your preferences, and it takes action on your behalf. It's an agent for you in figuring out, are you home or not? Being able to do things to be able to save you money, save you energy. And I think the world of robotics, whether it's things that move around, whether it's things that learn and become better with time, I think you'll find that suffused into all sorts of hardware devices that are out there, where you have a Darwin for devices. They're actually evolving with time. And things that are interesting in and around robotics is an area that's of a lot of interest to me and to Shasta right now.
In general, what's interesting, I would say among the many things that are interesting to us, a lot of what's interesting in this space seems to look like either systems or solutions companies. So it's not really about building a better widget, it's about what can you do with that? How can you actually deliver a clear value proposition to a critical mass of users? So robotics is certainly a place we've looked a lot. We have at least one announced investment in the space that's leveraging computer vision and real-time image processing to automate different practices in agriculture. This is literally a lettuce-killing robot is the first product. We've got a handful of other companies we've looked at very closely in that space, but it's really about an integrated system and solution. The second space, I guess I would mention, is looking for, I think there's been a proliferation of 3D vision sensors, and we'll continue to see that over the next couple of years. So interesting solutions that can be developed off of that new data set, I think is really, really interesting.
Do you want each of us to answer all these? I don't want that to get too monotonous.
No. Do you want to take a crack at it?
Well, quickly. So I think in general, just the explosion of connected devices, which in my mind is sort of the natural evolution of the smartphone. You know, we've got this smartphone stack that is now made in the billions, is now so cost effective and easy to embed in the world around us. That, you know, that's part of the reason why it's like you can turn your thermostat into a smartphone. What else in our life do we want to turn into a smartphone? And it is a vast universe. And so personally for me, where I've been super excited is to try and figure out how this technology really changes our lives in our home. And especially lives, maybe from a slightly different perspective, which is really how it changes being a parent, how it changes technology in the home. And you know, one fun study that I've actually been doing is as part of this glass collective, I've been wearing glass, which I have on my head for the last 3 weeks, and just did a blog post on, you know, actually the killer app for glass is not, you know, running around giving talks and showing how cool you are, but actually using them as a busy parent. And it's one of those use cases that I think has often been overlooked, and so much of the technology that is enabled by these connected devices, whether it makes the home better, it makes your living better, is a really interesting kind of home-centric insight. So that's one area, as well as the whole wearables and kind of reinventing new UI, you know, voice-dominant systems and things like that.
So actually, Ryan mentioned 3D cameras, and basically cameras that can give you RGB and D, so giving you depth as well is a very interesting space for me. And cameras in general is something that I've ended up with. A large portion of my portfolio has had something to do with cameras. Almost a third of my portfolio has ended up having some kind of computer vision or cameras affiliated with it. In some cases, they're not hardware companies, they're software companies, but they're using the camera, and that camera is the enabling hardware for it. In other cases, there are companies that are actually building custom built cameras or accessories for cameras in order to actually do interesting things with it.
Just trailing off on that thread, we're very excited about a 3D world online. And just, if you look at Instagram, Facebook, all these companies were built on a 2D photograph world, but 3D models are not accessible to everyone. We actually have a company called Matterport that they hack the Kinect, and they can scan 3 million 3D points per second and just render a perfect 3D model of any room, just like that, at more than 10x lower the cost. And they're starting now to go into commercial real estate, oil and gas industry, all these industries that need blueprint, and they're replacing all that. So think about what can be built on top of that stack from a software standpoint as well, and that's something that's getting us super excited.
Renata, I'm actually going to send the next question, start off with you, and I think the next topic will sort of be Kickstarter and Indiegogo. Number one, across all of you, I'd like to understand what your thoughts are on it. I think it's really easy for us to say it's a good thing, but I'd love to understand why it's good. What signals does it send to you? And then double clicking on that a little bit, does it potentially send sort of what I would call a false positive, which is that it is really easy. I'm probably, by the way, out in the pavilion, I probably backed half the people that are out there. But I may not be absolutely representative of the average American. And so the question is when you look at the data coming back from Kickstarter and Indiegogo, how do you reflect on its value relative to the eventual target customer?
I think a few data points. One is just the volume raised, right? I mean, if you have a critical mass of people that just you go out to raise 500 and you leave with a few million. I mean that's significant, right? And that sort of blows expectation of product market fit even from the founder's perspective. Another one is sort of rate of speed that the campaign gets met. If something closes up in a few days, that also talks about just speed up early adoption and just a pulse for that demand and for that product. So I think there are interesting factors to be learned about demand. I think it's a great distribution channel, right? I mean, you can just go direct to your end user, build a loyal user base, share your story, and just get people excited to follow your brand and what you're building and just follow you on your journey. And that's, when you're building a brand, that's really important. But, it's going back to the first question, it's hard to get that to manufacturing, stage and really make it a quality product, make it at scale, and understand what are the underlying unit economics that you're going to have for this to really be a viable business, like to really bring it from idea to business. And then that's sort of where we're going to spend a lot of time talking to you and sort of understanding, do you have what it takes, or do you understand how hard it is? But net positive for sure.
Yeah, I would guess that everybody in this room has given a lot of thought to the whole Kickstarter phenomenon. I'd say number one, I love the democratization of access to capital personally. I love that. Number two is people don't really realize how hard it is to build a great video, to build a great Kickstarter campaign. And there's only a handful that have broken out. We've invested in one that broke out, Ouya, along with Kleiner. And you have Pebble that's broken out, and Eric Mijakovsky and his team have done an amazing job with what they've done. But when you go there, it kind of goes down pretty steeply to people that raise maybe 2 to 3 million. And then it goes down very rapidly to people that raise like 50 to 200,000. And people don't really like to talk about that, but that's after they've been up for say 15 to 30 days. So one of the things that can happen with Kickstarter is if you don't approach it like you would approach, say, a military campaign, you have all your ducks in a row and you do the right video and you have things primed to go into the social networks, the issue that you can have is if it doesn't work out, it's out there. You've already pointed to the grandstand saying you're going to have a home run, and if you end up raising only $30,000 or $40,000 in your Kickstarter campaign, the flip side is you could prove to partners and other people that there might not be the demand for this new product that there would be otherwise. So you just have to be really thoughtful about how you use it, because it's like playing with live ammunition.
So as an example, like Lemnos, we have a partnership with Indiegogo, and we recommend a lot of our companies go through that process. But am I hearing you say maybe it's not for everybody, or is it for everybody, but you really have to plan this incredibly well?
I'd say you have to think about how it fits into your strategy, both for go-to-market and fundraising. And you have to be thoughtful about it. I think it's fantastic. I love it. I love that democratization, but you really have to think about, like anything that you do in social media, when you do it, you really need to do it with a purpose and an authenticity, and at the same time be ready. Because there are other people, there are other videos in a lot of these categories that you can't just throw it up and test. You have to go up there, and if you do that, you have to be well prepared and put your best foot forward, because you're building your brand, your reputation as a company the moment you do that.
So one of the things like you mentioned, we've seen examples of companies that have done well on Kickstarter and Indiegogo and then go on to get funding. I actually have several portfolio companies which raised a seed round already, but they're using Kickstarter as a marketing approach. So before they will actually go in and launch, they will actually launch on Kickstarter, right? So it's kind of the inverse of where they're not using it for fundraising, but they're using it for marketing and distribution. And that's something to think about depending on the type of product that you're doing and the stage of the company in terms of what's the actual use of the platform. Are you using it for fundraising or are you using it for distribution? So.
Good. What happens, and this one I'm really intrigued about, it's a sort of a personal thing for me. I came from video games, so Ouya, I did a bunch of games, but I think an interesting thing about that market is there's the word hit associated. When you talk about fashion, you talk about video games, you talk about hits, right? You talk about Halo, you talk about this particular fashion being the hit of the show. Tell me what happens when those two environments, hits, fashion, game, right? Something where there's a pulse, people either love it or they don't. What happens when that intersects hardware? So when a company comes to you and says, we've got the greatest interactive toy ever, it's going to be great, I'd love for you to invest. How do you look at that where there's an X factor even above hardware? How do you guys look at those type of companies?
So I'll start. I have a portfolio company that I invested in. It's not launched yet, so I can't tell you exactly what they're doing yet. But it's in the kids gaming space. It's doing tangible computing, and so it's got hardware components to it as well. And I basically took the prototype that the founders had home, and I tried it with my 3-year-old daughter. And for the next couple of weeks, she would keep telling me, like anytime I would take out the iPad and say, okay, let's do something, her reaction would be, no, I want to do that thing that we tried the other day, right? And that to me was a signal that, okay, like if a 3-year-old is basically capable of really like latching on to something, these founders have basically hit on something there. So that was the signal that I used in order to actually then think about investing in that company, right? And it's in the kids space, it's in gaming, it's in learning, and it's hardware, right? And it's not a negative signal by any means. It's just a question of, like for me, it came down to believing, like, can I see at least 1 or 2 data points that it actually works? Mm-hmm. And then the more interesting part was looking at the team and trying to figure out what's the motivation of the team and how do they actually go about their process of determining what they're going to build, right? Like, are they engineering it or are they just throwing darts at a wall, right? And so as long as they could show that they actually have an engineering-based process to say, like, this works, this does not work, and they're evaluating that and refining accordingly, that to me was a good sign, and that's how I ended up investing in that company.
Okay. So while Manu has a 3-year-old secret weapon
That's right.
to determine his hits, Ryan, what's your secret weapon over there?
Sorry, we
were whispering secrets. So
okay, yeah, clearly.
What was the question?
How do you know when a company comes to you at the sort of the intersection of X factor, a hit-based product at some level, and it's combined with hardware? How do you look at that company?
You know, to be honest, I just talked about we did a agriculture robots company. You know, these are not celebrity hits-driven things. These are real meat and potatoes, clear value proposition for solution. That's what I get excited about. So I see if somebody else at the firm's interested when I come across something like that.
But you'll go into space. You'll invest in space.
Absolutely. But
right.
Look, it costs $10,000 a kilogram just to piggyback on somebody else's rocket. So if you're going to be able to launch a modular rocket or a modular satellite, I mean, that's just cut and dry economics. That's
I think one way to answer this question is I think you've heard from a number of folks the use of the word platform. And you can't sell platforms to consumers. You have to sell solving a problem. And so you have to sell this is a really, really cool thing that can help you make something in your life easier. But if there isn't an obvious way that you can take that product or whatever has been built and really extend it and build upon it and continue to grow that company, then it starts to feel a little too much like kind of a one-off product company or a one-hit wonder. And while those can be really interesting, good businesses, they're likely not ones that venture firms are going to get very excited about. We're looking for those things that are going to be industry transformational and long-lived. And so it's got to be more than a one-hit thing or just on this latest current trend.
So I guess to add to that, where it does become relevant is, okay, do you have a breakout success or a big hit here that then you can leverage and snowball that into something more? So, look, to take Zynga as an example, right? They had a few massive hits, and then what I think made them a sustaining success was, let's take these massive hits and let's figure out how to port that audience and continue to roll that. So you can start with a breakout success and a big hit, but you need to find a way to kind of make that a sustaining opportunity. And so that's, I think, where a lot of the focus lies.
Yeah, but I think to the extent that someone out there is trying to build something that is sort of one capability or something like that, I'd try, focus on distribution or a unique sort of unfair advantage. If all of a sudden, Apple stores are carrying your product, or you're doing something for sort of the mother demographic and you do a partnership with Toys R Us, then you're going to get in front of a lot of people, and it might turn the table on your advantage. And if you're and also think about how you can give, picks to the gold diggers. How can you power these industries that are sort of one-hit wonders, or like fashion? How can you think about the fashion evolution and what type of new technology can you bring to that use case, right? I've seen a lot of people trying to do stuff around fitting rooms or 3D models of individuals, and you can try clothes online, or so think about what type of platform music can do to serve these one-hit markets. If you want to play in that, it's probably a better way than just go after the one hit.
I think a quick follow-on to that. When you guys look at companies, how does you see them very early? I think all of us see it relatively early. On the side of aesthetic, as it arcs towards fashion, do you guys look at that? Do you look at the founding teams on where it might go? I mean, I'll give you an example. You have Google Glass on right now. Do you think that's fashionable? Do you think they have the aesthetic? Right? I mean, I look at, okay, there's your answer.
I'm a self-acknowledged geek.
I mean, many of us are coded in gadgets, and I don't know that we've necessarily figured fashion out, but we think that the mass market will respond to fashion. But how do you look at the design aesthetic when you look at a company?
Yeah, I think when I think about what enables hardware today, I think about three things. It comes back to this. One is components are cheap. So whether it's processing, wireless, any of the things, accelerometers, they're becoming really cheap. Two, manufacturing is a lot less expensive. So even though I gave 3D printing a hard time, it's a huge enabler for being able to rapidly prototype, see what these things are like, and then send it off to a contract manufacturer and work with them. But the third piece that I think people overlook in these hardware businesses is the importance of the rise of social networking. And the reason for that is that with hardware, people touch hardware, they feel hardware, they see it, they take pride, they develop an emotional connection that people really don't develop with the web properties. Like, people may love Yelp and they may love Facebook, but when you have a phone or you have a fitness device
or a thermostat
and you're touching it, and you touch it multiple times a day, it actually connects with you in a visceral way that if you create something that's very positive that you're proud of, it's much more likely that you'll be a net promoter. And if you're a net promoter and there's a methodology for seeing what the scores are, and if the scores are higher, you're far likelier to take pictures of yourself with it, promote it to your friends, and you'll do it either because the humble brag, everybody's familiar with the humble brag about, I have the first this or that, Or you do it because you want to help make a friend's life better. And you say, hey, you should buy this because you'll love it for these reasons. So whether you talk about fashion, design, etc., it's incredibly important with hardware because you want to develop something that the end user, whether it's a consumer or it's in the enterprise, they develop this really positive emotional connection where they become a salesperson, effectively an advocate for your device. It's incredibly, incredibly important.
So I also want to add to that the importance of just design, and specifically like in not only just industrial design, but packaging. Does your product actually come with a user manual? It really shouldn't. It shouldn't require a user manual. What's the unboxing experience? What's the support experience? And designing all of these different components of the product, I think that is incredibly important. And so one of the exercises that I've done with one of my portfolio companies is basically imagine what your product would be like sitting in the Apple store, right? So start from there. Imagine walking into the Apple store and having your product on the shelves at the Apple store. What does it look like? What do you see? What does the consumer actually react to? What's the packaging like? What's the presentation like, right? And that level of detail in terms of what's the unboxing experience and everything. Apple is a really good example of doing this phenomenally well. And that's the level of detail that consumers have come to expect. Right? And regardless of whether you're a tiny 2-person company or you're one of the largest tech companies in the world, that's what the consumers expect. And you have to be able to work on that and be able to deliver that quality of design. So.
Let's talk about 800-pound gorillas for a moment. And we've just mentioned one collectively, which is Apple. A company builds amazing product. We all respect the product that they build, and they have a relatively strong market position or attempt to gather one really quickly. But there are other companies like this. Let's take Nike. Let's take Microsoft. Let's take in the future Google as they look more towards hardware, and as many other companies look towards
one thing
hardware.
I'd say for sure is you probably don't want to take a banana out of the gorilla's hands. If you think about Apple, for example, it probably is not a good idea to start a smartphone company today from scratch. That would be like taking a banana out of the gorilla's hands. I think it's really more about where you think the gorilla might go next and thinking about that or redefining the game. So I just want to adjust your analogy.
But extending the analogy, what happens when someone brings you that banana, right? Which is a company that says, I'm going after Apple.
You know what you do? You have to run faster than the other guy that has a banana. Yeah.
I mean, putting a point on this, right? As an example, in quantified self, we talked about this market a little bit, right? Nike is in the market, right? When there is an existing larger company in the space, does that create a no-fly zone relative to your thinking? Does it say are there opportunities around it? How do you look at that when that proposal, that PowerPoint, that whatever comes sliding across your desk?
So I'll give you two sides to this. One side is that if you're trying to build something on a mobile phone, you've got Apple, Google, HTC, Samsung, Microsoft, all companies with big, deep pockets who are basically gunning after each other. And in their fight against each other, they're not going to care about which startup they're going to trample, right? So in that situation, that's something I watch out for in terms of okay, if it's going to be something that will eventually, if you're filling a hole, and that hole will eventually get filled by one of the big players, then that's probably not something I would want to invest in. Okay. The flip of that is big companies also suffer from the problem that they can never get stuff done, right? They've got too many, they keep tripping over themselves, they can never get anything done on time, and they simply cannot move at the same speed at which a startup can. So provided the startup is in a space where you're literally not in the crosshairs and you're not going to get caught in the crossfire between the big companies, it's not a no-fly zone. It's definitely something worth looking at. If a small startup can execute fast and get something done very quickly, they can make a dent in that space.
I mean, you looked at Lytro, even though if you looked at the camera market, both in traditional DSLR, smartphone, the small form factor camera,
And the analysis on Lytra was very simple, that none of the big guys were going to bring this to market soon enough. It would be like 20 years, you'd never see a light field camera come out, just because the big guys were basically, they've got a cash cow business and they're competing on incremental features here and there, and they were not going to make that change happen. And the only way that we could actually bring that type of a product to market was you do it yourself. And it's a big gamble. It's a very tough thing to actually do that. But that's sometimes the only way of getting a new product out to market.
Renata, how do you look at market entrance and big versus little? And
Yeah, so just going back to the Nike example, I mean, we invested in Fitbit, right? And the time we invested in Fitbit, Nike was out just with that sensor that you would put on the shoe, and they were thinking about that as a way to enhance the shoe experience. Whereas Fitbit was thinking about middle of America, maybe sort of obese-ish population, and just if they knew how many steps they took and that was an incremental benefit towards health, that would just help them be better. So they actually had a different focus and a different audience at the beginning, and then they thought about what type of features the product needed to have. It needed to be easy to carry, something that was like passive usage, wireless syncing, so just make it very low friction for benefit. Nike wasn't thinking about that, right? Nike was thinking about, let me cut a hole in the shoe, put the little sensor in, and start the athlete that wants to do a power sprint, syncing with the music, just enhancing the shoe experience. So today it could seem competitive, at the time it wasn't, so it wasn't really going after a banana. I love this. And sometimes really, when it's not the core market or the core focus of the incumbent, people can come up with just better solutions, just better market intuition, just better product market fit, and we listen a lot to that as well.
so Ryan, like I often hear, Khosla, they're danger seekers, right? You
Sure.
really do look at the edge. How do you look at this?
Sure. Incumbents have a couple of unique characteristics, I think, that are interesting. One aspect is they're accountable to their current customer set. Startup doesn't have that problem because when you start, you don't have customers. So that's nice. Just to take Apple, which you mentioned, it actually wasn't that long ago. It's probably in most of the people in this room's memory that they weren't a smartphone incumbent at all. They didn't have that product, and many pundits thought it was unthinkable for them to do that. The incumbent was BlackBerry, right? They had a corporate email device. And now, not that many years later, they had a great product for their customer set, and the market opportunity was someplace different. It was with consumers, and it was with a completely different type of product at a completely different price point that everybody thought was insane. And now Apple is the 800-pound gorilla, and RIM is very different. So incumbents have accountability to customers and inertia, and so that makes it hard for them to steer. The second, I think, characteristic that's interesting about incumbents is they create markets, right? I mean, we've got a whole industry about mobile apps, which wouldn't exist without the iPhone, right? Myriad startups have been built on the back of the iPhone, so that creates a big set of opportunities.
Good. We've got time for one more question, so I'm going to loop back and I'm going to come back to 3D printing to sort of end out. And I think as we exit later on this evening, we're going to see some great 3D companies out there, both in various types of 3D printing. But something that's gained some momentum, I think, in the venture space and in terms of startups is around collaborative ownership, this idea that we share assets. And I want to bind this back to 3D printing and creation and ask you, how far do you think, for instance, 3D printing goes? Do we all end up owning one at our home? Does it aggregate at the neighborhood level? Do we share? How do you see that world breaking out?
So I'll start with this one only because I actually have a printer at home. So not only have I looked at this area, I'm actually a user myself. And it feels to me like back when I was a kid and schools started getting their Apple IIs, and the kids whose parents could afford it got one at home, and it became this really cool kind of way to almost play in a really technical way. And for me, I sort of feel like that's the analogy of the place we're at with 3D printing. It is an incredible way for people to tinker and play and make stuff. And so in some sense, where it's at is this there's obviously the productivity part of it for the professional market, but where this gets really exciting is this consumer side, this consumer adoption, and is it real? And I think the notion of how kids use these type of products and how these products can change education. I mean, the notion that inner city schools who can't afford to have a machine shop and trained TAs can literally buy a shop in a box and give their students the ability to make anything, make robots, make, in a safe way, I think is really transformational. And it's still like in the early days of the Apple II, where you're like, this is cool, but I can program this little block on the screen, that's about it. Where's this gonna go? And so I see it right now as an incredible way to engage people, and that we're just now getting started. And it is the process of making. It's the process. Yes, I like companies like Shapeways that build certain high-end made components. But what is so transformational about 3D printing is the quick iteration on the desktop. I'm watching this. I am engaged in this process, and I want to do more of it.
Yeah, and I want to defend myself because I said that it was a tough space. It's tough because there's so much competition for the printers themselves.
Yep.
But what I think about is that was more like, is it an overheated space being an entrepreneur building a printer company? But when you think about what it enables, that's what I get really excited about, because, and you think about that larger ecosystem, whether it's companies like Shapeways, whether it's the designers that can come up with great things that are articulated well through 3D printing. I think it's that larger ecosystem, the same way that if you were to take the Apple II analogy, that was a gateway to an enormous IT revolution that went well beyond the early incarnation of Apple. And I think for everybody in this room who's part of the maker revolution, thinking about it, is how do you use these tools to create other great things that are interesting, whether it's drones, robots, or it's on the input in terms of being the designer or the ecosystem around it. And from that point of view, I think it's unbelievably exciting, whether it's the way printers are now or the way they'll be in, say, 10 years when it's truly a consumer-grade product.
This also makes me think of another thing that I've been trying to dive into and really understand, which is this whole, Arduino, Raspberry Pi proliferation of these basically computing platforms that are made for people to learn, hack, play around with, really get their hands dirty. And that also feels to me like we're on the very early edge of some interesting developments. I set up my Raspberry Pi a few weeks ago, and I was blown away at the fact I had a fully functioning computer with a web browser and an open source, Microsoft Word knockoff, but also blown away with how hard it was to actually get it to the point where I could use it. And it's not in schools yet because of that. It's not in developing countries yet because of that. And so, this is really getting to the part of your question around kind of open source and sharing. And I see kind of movements like this. Again, I still feel like we're in the early days, but it's super exciting when you think about where those things could go.
But like Brie Pettis says,
Yep.
that MakerBot or that the 3D revolution has had its Macintosh moment. I have one at home as well, and I'm not quite sure we're at Mac level. I was there when we built the Mac. But the interesting thing is it has a lot of the precursors, right? Maybe we are in our Apple II moment, and hopefully we don't poke too many bad memory addresses. But
Apple I.
You think it's
yeah.
Apple I?
Yeah.
What are you two thoughts? 3D. How far does it go, and how fast?
So the way we're playing 3D at the moment, we love the printers, but we're excited about the software and how to get models at scale. And then you can really think about consumer applications, right? If that piece in a dishwasher breaks, wouldn't it be awesome to just go online and print, and there you go, and you replace it? So we think the software stack is not commoditizable. The printer itself has commoditized, and it's going to be maybe a feature war, a price competition war, and that's something we're, from an investment standpoint, not interested in being, so we love 3D software. But yeah, we envision a world where either people are going to have one at home or they're going to have one in their vicinity, the same way that you print your photos at Walgreens. You maybe want to print stuff at Walgreens or customize things for your home and you go pick it up. We think it's very possible.
And on that point, you mentioned Matterport earlier,
Yeah.
but this notion that, our phones, some point in the near future, are going to have 3D cameras.
3D cameras, yeah.
So the ability for us to take pictures of stuff, modify it, and then reprint it out, whether it's just a toy or a quick replica, is not that far away.
We're hoping 3 years.
And I'll add that the collaborative part that you touched on, where you can actually get 3D stuff printed collaboratively, that is huge. I have a company which was literally like, they had deadlines that, oh, by every Tuesday we need to get our next hardware rev done, so that they can then send it and get the prints, get 3D prints back by Friday, right? And they're literally doing like every week or every 2 week iterations on what their hardware looks like, and actually putting the hardware literally on a table in front of you so you can actually play with it and touch it and feel it and see how it works. So that I think is incredibly powerful. I don't know how far it goes in terms of at the consumer level, in terms of 3D printers. But I am also spending a lot of time, as I said, with camera companies, and so 3D scanning is very interesting to me as well, in terms of, can you actually just take an object, can you build a 3D scanner which can then you pump it into a 3D printer and actually replicate something. So I'm waiting for the replicator, basically.
Well, it seems like and we saw this a little earlier, I think, in the earlier presentation of these worlds colliding. I think the doll we saw earlier, I think the line was you could put an Arduino into the doll and start to, both 3D print it and then add logic and intelligence and hopefully someday personality to it. Seems like the worlds are colliding relatively rapidly. I think we've run out of time here today, but hopefully you can stay a little bit and interact with everybody here. But thank you so much for being so open and talking about the venture side of this hardware revolution.
Don't go after the banana.
Thank you.